Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I'm Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they happen in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historic context in which events take place. During each episode of the podcast, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that connect the dots between these events and the broader context in which they occur. This enables you to better understand and analyze these events that impact the global village in which we live. On today's episode, the issue before us is the mask is off. The hideous connections between Zionism, colonialism, capitalism, and genocide. This is the title of an article in Black Agenda Report, and it's written by the Black Alliance for Peace. It was originally published in or at the Black Alliance for Peace website, which is blackallianceforpeace.com. My guest is the chair of the coordinating committee of the Black Alliance for Peace, an editor and contributing columnist for the Black Agenda Report, and the Green Party candidate for Vice President of the United States in 2016, Ajamu Baraka. Ajamu, my brother, as always, welcome back.
Thank you so much. It's good to be with you once again.
So, Ajamu, the piece opens as follows. In April, students across the U.S. empire rose up with campus-based encampments designed to bring attention to the genocide against Palestine and demand that their universities divest from economies engaged in active genocidal campaigns. It came as little surprise to anyone who has ever read a history book that U.S. universities chose to stand by the Zionist genocide machine and instead attack their own students. Ajamu, there were and are a number of forces applying pressure to the leadership of these institutions to punish these students. Your thoughts on the intersection of genocide, of Zionism, capitalism, and colonialism, and how it's now impacting the higher education of kids across this country?
Well, the way we approached it, Dr. Leon, was to, in fact, make those connections reflected in that piece. We have always taken the position that colonialism is, in fact, fascism, that the intervention, the invading of the Americas in 1492 by the Europeans was the beginning of a process in which two things happened. The enrichment of Europe as a consequence of the conquering of the peoples, the indigenous peoples of the Americas, the theft of their lands, and the importation of Black people to provide free labor. This was the material basis for the rise of capitalism and the European so-called civilization. This is and was a colonial relationship. The peoples of these various territories that became Jamaica and Haiti and Colombia and Mexico had their wealth stolen from them and transported back to Europe, while the people themselves lacked any kind of human rights. Colonialism is based on a fascistic relationship in which people are terrorized into accepting oppression. It is the ultimate expression of fascistic policy. So we made the connection there. We said that also there are the connections of the other elements that characterize the rise of Europe and the domination of Europe over the last 500 years. This strange conception of patriarchy, which is something that was alien to most parts of the global South. This came on the heels of the imposition of Christian religions and some of their strange ideals regarding the role of men and so-called women. So this is also part of the process of European domination. And of course, all of this is within the context of imperialism and the rise and development of capitalism. So all of these elements have to be understood to be interconnected, and that if we're going to address the issues that are emerging in Palestine, for example, with the European settler colonial project called Israel, then we have to make sure we understand these historical processes, these connections, these dots that have to be connected. So that's reflected in our piece. That basically all of the talk about civilizational assistance and humanitarian interventions, of the responsibility to protect the Europeans devised over the course of decades. What has happened with Gaza is that they have now been exposed. The system has been exposed to what it is: a brutal, hideous system that degrades and dehumanizes human beings. So that was a thrust, the essence of that piece.
And an incredibly powerful piece at that. In fact, in the piece, it's written, this: Black Alliance for Peace has consistently asserted that as people rise up against the deepening crisis of capitalism, the veneer of Western civilization and enlightenment will fall, revealing the naked aggression and violence inherent in capitalism, imperialism, white supremacy, and patriarchy. The horror of the colonial Zionist campaign of genocide is that reveal. This reveal of colonial violence is forcing people to rethink the propaganda they have internalized. But the revelation of facts is not the same as drawing correct conclusions. What got me in that paragraph in the first sentence of the second is this whole idea of rethinking the propaganda. Because one of the things that I've been saying for a very long time is the Zionist narrative, they're losing the argument. They now realize that the covers have been pulled off, they've been exposed, and they are now going to extrajudicial and incredibly extreme measures to try to justify, resurrect, defend that narrative. And I think it's important for people to understand in this conversation that this is not an anti-Semitic conversation. This is an anti-Zionist conversation. And part of their narrative is conflating the two. And the final point is that not all Jews are Zionists, and not all Zionists are Jews, as in Joe Biden saying very clearly, very publicly, I am a Zionist. And Joe Biden isn't Jewish. Joe Biden is Irish Catholic. Ajamu Baraka.
You're absolutely right. Zionism is a political philosophy, a political doctrine, if you will. It is a doctrine that provided the foundation for a political project, which was a project embraced by and advanced by Europeans who defined themselves as Jewish, but secular Jews who wanted to capitalize on the rise of and consolidation of nationalism in the latter part of the 19th century to, in fact, create a national state for Jewish people. And so the ideal that of Jewish nationalism was being consolidated, and they decided that they would attempt to build this national home on the land that was under occupation and controlled by European powers that used to be referred to as Palestine. And that process began there. So this was a political project that then culminated in the creation of the Jewish state, or Israel, in 1948, with the full support of the colonial powers at that time, and even the victorious powers that came out of the Second World War. But that creation of the Zionist state in 1948 came at the expense, as always in the colonial projects, of the indigenous people. So you have what the Palestinians refer to as a Nakba, where 750,000 Palestinians were uprooted and basically displaced. Dozens and dozens of Arab villages across the territory of Palestine were conquered by the Israelis and controlled, and that became the contiguous land basis for the birth of Israel. So this process of colonial imposition is something now that's 75 years old. It didn't begin on October the 7th. It began even before 1948. So yes, this is a process, and part of the ability of the Zionists to be able to be successful is the connection of this project with European colonialism, with the subtle appeal to European superiority, the notion that they were bringing something new to the so-called Middle East, creating a paradise out of the desert. These were all very important cultural reference points that provided support for the settler colonial project. Very similar to what we had in the U.S. territory that became the United States of America. You know, notions of manifest destiny being connected to the program of God. You know, the white man's burden, both in the U.S. and throughout the world, to bring civilization. All of these were themes that helped to provide the support for what we see unfolding today. But today is even more naked, Dr. Leon, because what that statement talked about is the fact that all of this was dressed up in these sort of civilizational discussions, the discussions and language coming out of the European Enlightenment, notions of human rights and democracy and civilizational advancement. And so the interventions were always framed, interventions by Europeans were always framed as something that would be helpful to the natives. Because, of course, the people who were being imposed on, they needed to have that imposition because they needed to be able to develop as human societies. And of course, they couldn't do that without the Europeans, you know? So this became the justification for this project. And the violence that was at the center of this was also justified too, because it was those bad natives who didn't understand that they were being saved, that resisted colonialism, that needed to be suppressed, that needed to be eliminated. And so at the core center of the colonial project has always been violence, in particular the settler colonial projects, when you had settlers who come to a land and their main objective is to control the land, then the people themselves become an impediment. They're not needed. And so they are clear. That's what happened with the march across the U.S. from the East Coast to the West, where they shot, murdered, and raped and plundered from the East Coast to the West, establishing what became the United States of America. We see a similar process unfolding with the settler colonialists in Palestine. They took most of the land, about 77% of the land in 1948, and now with this invasion of Gaza and the escalation of violence on the West Bank, they are now prepared to finish the project from the river to the sea. They've always been quite clear about that they want that land to be exclusively under the control of the European Jewish ethno state.
And to that point, I'm glad you brought up from the river to the sea, because that language, that phraseology was originally Zionist phraseology.
Exactly.
And I'm bringing that up because this goes back to the whole conversation about the narrative. Now, if I go on a college campus and I say, from the river to the sea, Palestine must be free, oh, I'm anti-Semitic. Oh, I'm using language that is disturbing to the sensibilities of the good Jewish students. That's not their language. The Zionist settler colonialists first used that phraseology. And along the lines of propaganda, I just want to point out a couple of things. One is the New York Times a few months ago had an editorial meeting where they decided they were no longer going to use the term occupied territories, for example. Now, that's phraseology that came out of the United Nations. And that has been the internationally accepted reference of that space. They are the occupied territories. But now the New York Times has decided or told their writers they shouldn't really use that. They should stay as far away from using that language as much as possible. One of the reasons being that when you refer to occupied territory, that means you have an occupier and it means you have the occupied. And international law says that the occupied can use any means at their disposal to resist the occupier. It also means that this whole one of the things that a lot of people love to start these conversations with is Israel has a right to exist. But if you understand that Israel is the occupier, then that position then becomes in question. So that's just one. This whole idea of all of these Jewish students at Columbia that were under threat and being challenged, I never saw any evidence to support that story. In fact, when you look at the students that are involved in the protest, what you find is there are a lot of American Jewish students that are working with and supporting the Palestinians. For example, she's not a student, but her last name is Klein. I just draw a blank on her first name.
Naomi.
I'm sorry?
Naomi?
Naomi Klein. Naomi Klein is Jewish. And Naomi Klein was one of the featured speakers at the Columbia protests. So they're going back to the narrative. What I think they are finding is they are losing control of the narrative.
And you're right. That narrative is very, very important. The use of language is important, and the ruling elements understand it.
The ability to define is the ability to control.
Exactly, and that's why they were very careful, meaning the ruling elements, and even framing what was happening on these college campuses as so-called pro-Palestinian efforts. Well, they weren't really pro-Palestinian efforts; they were anti-genocide efforts. But the idea was to try to implant in the minds of the average reader that these people took not only a political position, but a position that was in alignment with that of Hamas. And so this was the basis of the demonization of these students that then allow for violence to be directed at them. People have to be reminded there was no violence in any of these encampments. These were peaceful protests, something that theoretically you're supposed to have a right to, in fact, do, even if those protests can be somewhat disruptive. But how disruptive was it and is it to have some tents put up on open spaces on a college campus? But as you said earlier, as you intro this conversation, there appeared to be a decision made at the highest levels that they were not going to tolerate any real opposition on these campuses, and that what they were going to, in fact, do was to violently suppress those efforts, the encampments, of the protests. And the violence was imposed on the students by who? The representatives of the states. And these were at the elite campuses controlled by political elements firmly in alignment with what party? The Democrat Party. So this was something that was a partisan effort, not only in terms of support of Israel, but in terms of support for the Biden policy of support for genocide.
Well, wait a minute. When you put this in a partisan context, then how, with that understanding, do you explain Mike Johnson, the Republican Speaker of the House, going to Columbia and standing there and challenging the students and spewing a lot of lies? Again, he was right there in front and center talking about, oh, the students have been threatened and all, and no such evidence. And folks, I got to keep going back to this because this is so important. No such evidence has been presented. So Mike Johnson, Republican House Speaker, he shows up. A whole lot of Republicans have it. So how do you put that in the partisan context?
The majority of the uprisings have taken place on those campuses that are in alignment with the Democrats. But so that's a partisan effort in that sense. But is the point you're making, and I think it's a very important one, is to remind people that the positions of the U.S. state on Israel is in fact a bipartisan position.
Okay.
That the Republicans are even the non-Trumpian Republicans are just as adamant in their support for Israel as the Democrats. So this is the nature of this, what I refer to as the growing consolidation of fascism. You know, the popular perception or the popular position is that the main threat of fascist development in the U.S. is coming from the Trumpian right. As you know, I've been making the counter argument that the driving force of a particular form of U.S. fascism, reflecting the new historical conditions, the conditions of today, is emanating from the neoliberal right that is fascist. So, but what we see now in the last couple of months, is a very dangerous development, and I'm glad you mentioned Mike Johnson, is what I consider to be now the real consolidation that's happening in the open, if you can see it. Why do you think Mike Johnson's playing this kind of role? We all know that Mike Johnson wouldn't even be the speaker today without the deal that was cut with Democrats to allow him to be able to avoid being displaced by his own caucus. Why was it that the Trumpian forces have been adamant in their opposition to further U.S. public money being sent to Ukraine in support of the Ukrainian proxy war? But then all of a sudden, that criticism is muted, and Mike Johnson, who's clearly in alignment with Donald Trump, cuts a deal with the Democrats to allow $61 billion to go to Ukraine. I make the argument that not only is this a reflection of the fact that the very powerful elements in the ruling class have decided that there's going to be a second Trump term, but it is a reflection of the growing open embracement, if you will, between the Trumpian forces and the neoliberal forces, the consolidation of fascism. So this is a very dangerous, I think, dangerous development here in this country. And right now, the most effective opposition to it are the students across the country. And that's very important. Very important that people understand that, because what the students are involved in, even if they don't define it as such, is really an anti-fascist opposition.
I want to just point out a couple of other points that you were as we've been talking about this narrative. There is this narrative that the United States is involved and backing the Zionist regime in Israel because it's defending democracy. There's nothing democratic about the Zionist state, the settler colonial state of Israel. Palestinians, indigenous Palestinians, do not have the same rights as Jews in Israel. There is nothing democratic about Israel. The United States says it's in Ukraine in order to protect democracy. If that's true, then why did the United States go into Ukraine in 2014 and overthrow the democratically elected Lukashenko government in the Maidan coup in 2014? Folks, look it up. We're not making it up. This is not conspiracy theory. Why did and put in place right sector Nazis, real Nazis in Ukraine? The United States says it must go into Haiti. Why? To quell unrest and protect democracy. The United States is the one fomenting the unrest, and the United States, the DEA, has been proven with Colombian mercenaries and assassins are the ones that went in and assassinated the Haitian president, Jovenel Moise. So there, I could go on and on and on, Ajamu, but again, it's the narrative.
Exactly, and that narrative is important because that determines the politics. And this collaboration we see of developing, this cross-party, this bipartisan collaboration, is a very dangerous development. The fact that Ukraine is defined as a democracy is dangerous. The fact that the U.S. Continues to define itself as a democracy and a champion of human rights while systematically and simultaneously supporting a genocide in Gaza is dangerous. But you know what, Dr. Leon, the obfuscation of U.S. policies by their control of the narratives is now being diminished. That this is what we talked about in terms of the dots being connected, and the veneer of civilization and high principles are now being stripped away. We see the naked reality of what this Western project has always been. This Western colonial capitalist project has always been. What we're seeing in Gaza is the most brutal expression of it ever allowed to be exposed to the U.S. population. And what do I mean by that? We have to understand that as brutal as we have seen the situation in Gaza, it's not even the most brutal that has developed over the last few years. People have to remember that NATO, under the first Black president, went in and completely destroyed the most prosperous state on the African continent, Libya, in the process of a bombing campaign that occurred over months, and the arming and equipping and support of a bunch of bandits on the ground. Is estimated between 30 and 50,000 people lost their lives, were murdered. The difference was that we didn't see that.
Mm-hmm.
We had to be relying on reports primarily filtered through the Western press. So this is an example. That is, Gaza is an example, a brutal example of what happens, how the colonial project has unfolded. And now people are beginning to rethink everything. This is what we talk about in terms of questioning the propaganda that one is exposed to as part of a so-called educational process. Everything that you have been exposed to in this country is a lie. You have been exposed to a colonial education that was geared to provide support to a minority interest of a ruling class that doesn't give a damn about ordinary people, really doesn't give a damn about people in the U.S. at all, and certainly does not see non-European people as worthy of dignity and human rights. That's why you can have a situation like Gaza, where they are starving people to death, bombing and killing children and women primarily,
In
and getting away
hospitals.
with it.
In
And getting away
hospitals.
with it. Yes. You remember when it first started, Dr. Leon, when Al Shifter was first hit with a bomb, and it was like global news. And even the Israelis tried to explain it away because in all of these conflicts, the hospitals have always been allowed to be an oasis, if you will, within the middle of these conflicts. It was seen to be the most egregious war crime when a military attacked a hospital. Okay, people don't seem to understand, Dr. Leon, what the Israeli fascists are doing today is really kind of unprecedented. They've been allowed to basically attack and dismantle and destroy something like 36 hospitals. So
There's not a hospital left.
when Al Shifter was first attacked, there's an outcry, but then it died down. What that said to the fascists, Israeli fascists, was we can get away with this. And that's exactly what they did. So this kind of brutality that we're seeing in Gaza is a reflection of the kind of brutality that made the West what it is today.
They tried to rationalize the attacking and bombing of hospitals by saying Hamas was using the hospitals as terrorist centers. There were tunnels under the hospitals, all proven to be false. Again, the narrative, it was a lie. IDF forces would even dress as doctors, and male soldiers would disguise themselves as women, go into the hospital, kill 15, 20, 30 people, then say, oh, they were all Hamas sympathizers. You mentioned the educational process, going back to what's happening on the college campuses across the country. You mentioned the educational process. Are there elements within the country that are using this campus unrest as the basis for them to undermine education in the United States? Because we know that higher education in the United States has been under attack by conservative forces for a number of years. Do you see in some of this the attacks on the presidents of many of these institutions as being an attack on academia?
I do, and I see this as the beginning of a more systematic attack. We're already seeing cases where administrations are attempting to put in place rules that would, in effect, make it illegal or subject students and faculty members to being suspended, expelled, lose their jobs,
Lose their funding, lose their government funding.
Lose their government funding, just raising certain kinds of questions as it relates primarily to Israel.
Mm-hmm.
But also, it's more than just Israel. It's really a U.S. A foreign policy. So this is, again, for me, another example of the consolidating fascism here in this country. Now, we're really going to see where we are once the students come back in the fall, because for all intents and purposes, we're going to see a bit of a petering out of this. And of course, the press is going to jump on this as though this is kind of some kind of reflection of the flightiness of students. Well, no, the organizing will be taking place this summer. The real battle is going to unfold probably in the fall. So, it remains to be seen what kind of impact this will have. But, all of this is reflective of the complete jettison of liberal values at these liberal institutions and liberal philosophy, being, again, primarily driven by neoliberals with their liberal allies. That basically, in order for the U.S. empire to maintain its global hegemony, it has to jettison any constraints and any So any concerns about human rights and human dignity on the part of any of their victims or potential victims, that has to be ignored. Now is about the brutal imposition of power in order to maintain hegemony. That's why they have more than 40 nations under economic sanctions. That's why they have strengthened their military command apparatus around the world, including on the African continent. That's why they are using their superior military force and political power to intervene once again into Haiti. So this is a dangerous moment, and people have to understand how dangerous this moment really is.
You know, I want to move on from this because there are a number of things that we also need to cover. But as we start to wrap up this portion of the conversation, and just as another example of how insidious so much of this is, there's a law professor at Bolt Hall, which is the law school at University of California, Berkeley. His name is Stephen Davidoff Solomon, and he published an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, October 15th, 2023. And the piece is entitled, and I just lost my, here we go. Here we go. The piece is entitled, "Don't Hire My Anti-Semitic Law Students. Would your clients want an attorney who condones hatred and monstrous crimes?" And this is a little bit of what he wrote. "I teach corporate law at the University of California, Berkeley, and I'm an advisor to the Jewish Law Students Association. My students are largely engaged and well prepared, and I regularly recommend them to legal employers. But if you don't want to hire people who advocate hate and practice discrimination, don't hire some of my students. Anti-Semitic conduct is nothing new on university campuses, including here at Berkeley." And what he's doing here is a number of things. One, again, he's conflating opposition to genocide with anti-Semitism. He is conflating anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. And when law professors at prestigious institutions such as the University of California, Berkeley, Bolt Hall, start to write to their the law firms that they have influence at, in, and or over, "Don't hire my students because their anti-Semitic conduct is nothing new on university campuses, including here at Berkeley," that's dangerous, Ajamu Baraka.
Well, it really is, and it's reflective of a tendency that's unfolding across the country, unfortunately. But you know what, Dr. Leon, is really encouraging that so many young people, so many students are prepared to make the sacrifice. They have understood that their positions could have a major impact on their careers, if you will. We have a few students in the Black Alliance for Peace who have been thrown out of school, people who have just done their dissertation defense, and now that's up in the air because they were suspended and banned from the campus. And they knew this was a possibility when they decided to not only join, but also lead some of the protests. And that is encouraging because what is happening is that there is a new kind of sensitivity, new kind of awareness that's being developed, primarily with the Generation Z, regarding violence and war. And if you think about it, it's understandable that this will be the generation that will finally be sick of conflict, sick of war, because these are folks, Dr. Leon, that have never known anything but war.
My son is 22 years old, just graduated from Hampton University this past Sunday. Way to go, boy.
Congratulations.
And has never known peace in his lifetime.
Exactly. The 21st century has been a century of conflict, a century of war. And this was basically predicted by the Project for a New American Century. that it was committed to using the U.S.'s superior military strength to impose the U.S. on the rest of the planet, to make sure that the U.S. was the hegemonic power on the planet with no competitors. And that's exactly what they have been doing, beginning with the invasion of Afghanistan and up to today. And so this generation who for the first time doesn't have any illusions about the so-called American dream, that has seen the normalization of mass shootings, that has seen nothing but war and conflict their entire life. Now they're being exposed to the horrors of a live stream genocide, and they have finally said enough is enough. And so that is encouraging, and it's the base of the kind of alternative political organizing that many of us are involved in. Because, unless we are able to build a movement powerful enough to put a break on these maniacs who are making policies today, we are on a fast track to human extinction. I mean, you look at what's happening in Ukraine, and you connect that to Israel. I mean, this is a moment that these young people are beginning to understand is a moment in which, if they don't make the pivot from just being concerned with genocide in Gaza, as important as that is, to this being a generalized movement against war and for peace and for social transformation, then I think they recognize we all are facing an existential threat.
The Black Alliance for Peace closes its piece with, as the masses of African people examine with new eyes the relationship between Zionists and Palestine, what will we conclude? Will we fall for the ploy to scapegoat Benjamin Netanyahu for all of Israel's crimes and then fall back to complacency after he is removed from office? Or will we make the connection between Israel and colonialism and capitalism and genocide? And I'm glad you mentioned in your piece Benjamin Netanyahu, and will we fall for the ploy to scapegoat him? Because what a lot of people don't really appreciate, as you listen to Joe Biden talk about Benjamin Netanyahu needs to go, and Tony Blinken made reference to that, folks who really don't understand the dynamics and the intricacies of Israeli politics have to understand, if you get rid of Netanyahu, who or what does he get replaced with or by? Because most folks don't understand the compromises that Netanyahu had to make in order to remain in power. And he had to compromise, if this is even fathomable, he had to compromise with even more hawkish, more racist, more white supremacist elements within that Zionist society than even Netanyahu is. And he's about as racist as one could think they could get. But when you start talking about Smotrich and you start talking about Ben Gvir, I mean, these folks are evil personified.
They're fascists. And what is interesting about that analysis you just laid out too is the fact that it is a ploy, and we've been sort of raising this question or trying to help people do this because what they're trying to do is divert attention away from the settler colonial project itself, its nature, and the policies of Benjamin Netanyahu. But the Netanyahu policies are a reflection of the Israeli society. Over 80% of Israeli society supported the incursion, the invasion of Gaza. There are people who are criticizing the government for not being tough enough. Okay, so it's the project itself. We all have seen those of us who follow this, the images of the Israelis marching with signs, "Kill all the Arabs, death to Arabs." That society has gone actually mad. It really has.
And many of them, particularly in the West Bank, are carrying weapons supplied by the United States. And these are rogue bands of settlers that are indiscriminately attacking indigenous Palestinians and murdering them where they stand.
I went to the West Bank. I went to the West Bank in 2014, and I saw with my own eyes those kinds of elements, those kinds of racist elements, toting guns. One of the most vicious and dangerous places I've ever seen in my life.
Wait a minute, and let me add, many of these people weren't born there. These people are from Brooklyn. These folks are from Brooklyn.
Exactly.
These folks,
it's nothing but Americans there. Yeah. You could be a Jewish bus rider, a driver one day, and next week you could be a colonialist carrying an M16 and able to shoot and kill a Palestinian with impunity.
But it's a democracy.
So this is
it can't be. It's a democracy, Ajamu.
Right. Yeah. So this is what is being exposed, and this is why we have the uprising. And what they don't seem to understand, Dr. Leon, that is the ruling element. There's no reversal. You see these articles where Democrats would say that, in essence, this will blow over, and people will recognize that the real threat is Donald Trump, and then you'll come back into the fold and vote for Joe. That ain't happening this time. Especially even after all of this, where you see that Trump is leading across the country, the turnout for Democrats are not going to be anywhere where it needs to be in order to stem this Trump tide. They have really screwed up on this one, the Democrats.
I'm glad you raised that point, because there are a lot of people that don't. What those who make those statements do is they try to personalize the atrocities, and they try to personalize the policy instead of understanding it's American foreign policy. And so when you look at the policies of Joe Biden and you look at a lot of the policies of Donald Trump, Biden has in many regards been more Trumpian than Trump. Look at Julian Assange, for example.
Exactly, like you said, it's the same policy. See, this all the cultural war and all that. These are the only elements that really differentiate these two parties. Underneath that, there is unanimity among the ruling elements. Now, there's some real conflicts of interest, though, because what Trump represents are those class forces that are national. They are the ones that they want a bigger piece of the pie within the U.S. and they feel oppressed by the globalists, by international capital, finance capital. Really is the hegemonic capitalist sector, and so they're the ones that want expanded opportunities. They're the ones that feel threatened by all of this importation coming into the country from places like China, understanding that. And they understand this, it ain't just the Chinese government that's importing consumer goods. It is U.S. corporations who use China as a platform to bring stuff into the U.S. And so they're saying, hey, you all are killing us. You're killing us.
The iPhone is a perfect example.
Yeah. And so that is part of the tension there, and those are the forces that the Trumpian people represent. But ideologically, they all are connected to, they all support the continuation of the capitalist system. So there's no contradictions there. It is an intra-bourgeois struggle. And people make the mistake of allowing themselves to be pulled into that struggle. We've got to define our objective interests and organize around those interests. And when you do that, basically you recognize that it's the duopoly that has to be smashed, that you don't fall prey to all of these games people being played. The Biden administration pretending like they're really taking a position against Netanyahu and all this kind of crap. I mean, this is about advancing the interests of the most powerful sectors of capital in this country.
Final point on this, because we could stay on this for a month. Another element of the hypocrisy. So last week, Joe Biden says, I'm taking a stand. I've drawn a line in the sand, and we're not going to send these. We're going to have a pause on these weapons to Israel. Well, today they announced what? A $1 billion weapon
Increase.
package
Yeah.
on its way to where? On its way to Israel. This is a money laundering scheme, folks. Your tax dollars are being used to buy and send weapons of genocide to the settler colonial state.
And remember, it's not like the money's being sent to Israel.
Right.
This is a lateral transfer
To
from
Lockheed
the
Martin.
coffers of the U.S. state to the pockets of the military-industrial complex
Right.
for the weapons that then get sent to Israel.
Say that again, please.
This is a lateral transfer.
Preach it
from
to those in the back pew, Reverend
coffers.
Barack.
Your money's being stolen, taken from you, sent to the military-industrial complex, the defense contractors, for weapons that are then sent to Israel to commit crimes in your name.
Amen. And another example, the U.S. planned to outsource its imperialism in Haiti to Kenya. This is from MSN. The U.S. has long outsourced meddling in Haiti to global South countries. Recently, Kenya has agreed to take over leading a U.S.-backed multinational police intervention there, justifying its own quote-unquote stabilization mission with Pan-Africanist rhetoric. And William Ruto, the president of Kenya, is scheduled to meet with Joe Biden in the White House on the 23rd of this month as the first, I think it's 200 so-called police, but these are incredibly brutal. These aren't New York this ain't NYPD. This is not LAPD. No, these are U.S. trained brutal hit squads that they're sending in to Haiti via Kenya at the behest of the United States.
It's
Ajamu
Kenyan military. Kenyan military is a misnomer to refer to these forces just as police. That gives it sort of a milder sort of image,
innocuous.
If you will. Innocuous.
They're going to establish law and order.
This is a military invasion that is going to result in hundreds of deaths of Haitians, because there will be resistance. They've already said there's going to be resistance. And so to save Haiti, supposedly, they have imposed this military invasion. You know, Dr. Leon, as you know, one of the things that really has made Western colonialism so effective has always been its ability to divide people, to have people who are people working with them who actually should be against them. And so here we have one of the most egregious examples of that in this period, with the Kenyans being recruited to front for U.S. white power. You know, in that article, or one of the other articles, they talked about they kind of implied that this was it didn't have a race component to it, that because these are a black intervention of troops coming from Kenya and Jamaica and Grenada, that this is just solidarity. This is Pan-African solidarity, and they're using that term stabilization. You know, but this is the white man's burden. This is white saviorism, you in blackface.
I
The
call
power
it minstrel diplomacy. It's a blackface on white imperialism.
Exactly.
It's minstrel diplomacy. They might as well just start singing Mammy.
Who's paying for this? The U.S. Who provide? How do you move troops from Kenya all the way over to Haiti? Kenyans don't have that capacity.
Who feeds them? Who supports them? Who provides the logistics for them?
And anybody who believes that a government and a society that can justify genocide, supporting genocide in Gaza, they then turn around and are supposed to be concerned about black life in Haiti. You got to be a fool. Or I got a bridge for you to sell. I mean, you've got to ask the right questions, folks. Why is the U.S. involved in this? When has the U.S. been on the right side of history in any question? When has the U.S. really been committed to any kind of humanitarian anything? Okay, so this is something. This is another move by the U.S. to strengthen itself in the Caribbean and in our region. When we say our region, we say that we are part of the broader Americas. America isn't just the United States of America. America are all of the nations in the Caribbean and in Central and South America. And we have a campaign, the Black Alliance for Peace, where we say that we support the idea of making this region a zone of peace. And we say the only way we can make this a zone of peace, we have to eject the U.S. from this region.
One of the things that they love to talk about as it relates to Haiti and the violence in Haiti, all these armed gangs that are roaming the countryside like feral cats or wolves or whatever. And I haven't heard anybody talk about the weapons that these individuals are carrying. Where do the weapons come from? And who pays for the weapons? And here's some very simple data. The average Haitian makes $1,694 in a year. $1,694 in a year. That's $4.64 a day. A sniper rifle costs about $1,800. Where does a Haitian who makes $4.64 a day, if he or she's lucky, amass the money to buy an $1,800 sniper rifle? A 40 caliber Beretta pistol costs close to $1,000. You make $4.64 a day. Where are you getting these weapons? How are they getting into the country? We don't hear. It goes back to the adage, don't start nothing, won't be nothing. If the United States were not behind fanning the flames of this unrest, there wouldn't be any unrest. Ajamu Baraka.
You're absolutely right. I mean, this is the importation of these weapons. It's all part of a process. You have different sectors of the Haitian ruling class have their own, basically their own paramilitaries,
and they control the ports.
They control, but they're called gangs here in the U.S.
Right.
And the other thing that we have to make sure that we are very clear on, all of this activity, the vast majority of this so-called gang activity, is centralized in Port-au-Prince, the capital. You go outside Port-au-Prince, it's relatively normal. They're not roaming the countryside. Basically, it's a Port-au-Prince kind of thing. Mm-hmm. It's a power kind of thing. Okay, and so you're right. This is the military aspect of the conflict, the struggles among sectors of the ruling class in Haiti. What we call compradors, who are in cahoots with the powerful economic sectors outside of Haiti, primarily the U.S., but also the Canadians and even France. So this is another economic struggle being translated into a armed struggle in Haiti.
And quickly talk about, because a lot of people listening to this would ask the question, well, what's behind all of this? Why Haiti? And we know the historic aspects of this in terms of the first successful slave uprising, throwing France out of Haiti in the 1800s. We know that story, but connecting the dots in the current context, this is, I believe, one of the elements is a preemptive move against China. As the United States continues to try to bait China into a war over Taiwan, the United States realizes that they're going to lose access to their cheaper Chinese labor sources. And there is a lot of labor in Haiti. A lot of, again, folks make $4.64 a day in Haiti. If you look at where Haiti is located, the United States wants to build a naval base in Haiti as another stopgap measure to protect the Pacific. We know that there's oil. Some geologists have estimated there's more oil off the coast of Haiti than there is off the coast of Venezuela. We know about the relationship between Nicaragua and China. China wants to build a Suez-type canal through Nicaragua. The United States doesn't want that to happen. So a lot of this has, I believe, to do with preemptive measures that the United States is taking in anticipation of what's happening in other places. Your thoughts, sir?
I think you're right. I mean, the geopolitics are quite clear that, Haiti is one of the largest countries in the Caribbean, if not the largest. And as you said, it is a haven for cheap labor. There's significant foreign investment taking advantage of that cheap labor right now. It has those potential deposits of oil off the coast. And politically, is key. We remember the connection that was made between Haiti and Venezuela for a few years. And so making sure that Haiti does not move
the Petro-Carib project.
Petro-Carib, yes.
Where Venezuela was providing Haiti oil below market rates, so Haiti could then sell the oil, generate revenue for itself.
And that was seen as a threat to U.S. imperialism. And so and those kind of political connections, they understand what many people and many of your listeners may not know also. There are very strong currents of progressivism or leftism, if you will, in Haiti. And the biggest fears that the U.S. has is those forces actually able to take power in Haiti. That would transform geopolitics in this region. And so, that's why they are intervening. That's why they have encouraged other countries in the Caribbean to be a part of this, the Bahamas, Jamaica, Grenada, to be part of this what I call neoliberal Pan-Africanism. And because they want to keep Haiti in their pocket. Look, the so-called governing council that they just put in place, in order to serve on that governing council, you had to commit of this transitional council. You had to commit to the U.S. intervention. You had to be in alignment with it. If not, you were not going to be allowed to serve on that transitional ruling council. And they talk about elections in Haiti, but they talk about the possibility of elections in 2026. So this is not a democratic intervention. This is not on behalf of the interests of Haiti. This is about the interests of U.S. imperialism.
Final question. Talk about this in a broader context of a number of African countries demanding now that the United States militarily leave their countries. Niger has done this. I think Chad is demanding that the United States take its troops out. I think Mali is making a similar request. And Karine Jean-Pierre, by the way, a Haitian American press secretary for the administration, says that Ruto coming from Kenya to the United States, that the United States is going to need African leadership in order to promote the United States interests. I'm paraphrasing, but that's her basic point. So once again, minstrel diplomacy, a blackface on the racist administrative message. But talk about that quickly, please, in the broader context of African countries demanding that the United States leave their soil militarily.
First, if the U.S. was really interested in African leadership, it would have listened to African leadership that was trying to bring about a peaceful resolution of the situation in Libya before NATO went in and destroyed that state. So we know that's all BS. Across the African continent, yes, in particular in the Sahel region, you have these progressive militaries that have taken power because the civilian institutions have been so weak. And one of the first moves they've been making is to try to assert authentic sovereignty. What they discovered was you cannot be sovereign if you have foreign military troops in your country, and that these troops act like and behave as though it's their country.
And you
It
can't
says
be sovereign if
disrespect.
you don't control your economy and the resources under your soil.
Exactly. And so they've been invited to, in fact, leave. And they are leaving. The U.S. is still dragging its feet in Niger. But this is catching on. And now with the we don't have time to talk about what's happening with Senegal, but you have another progressive change where the French are going to probably end up being pushed even out of Senegal. So you have a massive transformation taking place on the African continent in this section of Africa for now. But there's the model is a model that is now threatening to many of the other Pompadour leaders on the African continent. That real change may be in the works. We may have, in fact, an authentic Pan-African movement finally, once again.
Folks, I have to thank my guest, Brother Ajamu Baraka, for joining me today. Brother Baraka, thank you so much. Greatly, greatly appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. Stay tuned. New episodes every week. Also, please follow and subscribe, leave a review, share the show. Follow us on social media. You can find all the links below in the show description. Do us a huge, huge, huge favor. Go to Patreon, please, and contribute. This is not an inexpensive venture to engage in, and your support is greatly, greatly appreciated. And as you all can see every week, you're getting a hell of a lot for your money. Remember, this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge, because talk without analysis is just chatter, and we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See you again next time. Until then, I'm Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a good one. We're out. Peace.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.